Hello, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about interviewing in this new virtual work environment. There are some traditional aspects, but there are also some things that are going to be a little bit new. I don't know why it's not letting me. There we go. So today's objectives. We are so lucky to have with us Angela Pasquale, an executive HR consultant who is a double alum from Framingham State University with not only her bachelor's degree, but a master's in HR, which she received along with our wonderful Dawn Ross. She has a lot of experience on both sides of the table when it comes to the interview process. And we are thrilled that she is here today to give us her professional insight on how to navigate the interview and job search process during this time. So that's probably the highlight of today's presentation. And together we will help you begin to identify those skills and attributes that employers are looking for now. And again, some are the traditional things, but there are some things that you might not have thought about. We're going to discuss how to prepare for the job interview and learn how to anticipate some new types of interview questions. So the top 10 list, and you can see them here, the top 10 list of skills and qualities that employers want in a new hire. And I know that you can read them, they're up on the screen. Angela, would you like to discuss a little bit about what you think of some of these top 10 lists?
I'd love to. The first thing I'd like to say about the list is it's really impressive because it can go for just across industries and all levels of employment. These are things that employers are always going to be looking for in their candidates: communication skills, planning and organizing. These can go across, like I said, all industries. So what I think would be valuable throughout this presentation is for someone to have a piece of paper and a pen. And as we go along, this will help you build a really nice interview question guideline book for yourself. So the first thing I'd like to ask people to do is to take a good look at this list and pick out the top 2 or 3 things that really speak to your skills and qualities. And we're going to build upon them as we continue.
Okay. Yeah, just give me a shout out when I should be changing the slide. And so we talked about a top 10 list of skills. There are also sort of a top 10 list of values that employers want, attributes that employers are looking for. Skills are often what you can do, but a value really is who you are. And again, these are the things that employers want in their new hires. It's not enough that you have the skills that they're looking for, but they really want to know that they can work with you and that you're going to fit into their company. So these are some of those attributes and personality traits that are that you have. I know you have them from your different roles that you've played and the different experiences that you've had. So these are some of the things to think about. What type of personality traits do you have that you think an employer is going to want in their business?
Absolutely. And what also I think is important is to, again, pick out the top 2 or 3 that really apply to who you are, and realize that some of these things will just come across in your demeanor and through your interview naturally. So you might say, well, how would my values come across in a conversation? Well, if you look at the positive attitude, are you answering the questions with a glass half full approach? Or are you answering with them with a glass half empty approach? Just simple ways in how you phrase things will show people if you're positive or a negative person. Another one of my favorites is reliability. Were you on time for your appointment? Were you on time for that phone call? Were you waiting to pick it up on the first or second ring? So that will show as a value that it's important to you for you to be reliable. So I think some of these things will naturally shine and come through. But again, pick a couple that will really speak to you and just jot them down as we continue on.
And this is actually very important for today's working environment. These are additional skills that I believe you really do need to showcase to an employer. And these are all the remote skills that you have, whether it's Zoom, whether it's MS Teams, other platforms. You have had to be learning remotely this entire semester. You're on a remote learning experience right now. So you have had to master some technology. And even if the company might have a different platform, you have had experience learning these new techniques now. So these are things that, whether it be on your resume, in your cover letter, and especially during an interview, you might be asked about what your feeling is about working remotely, as well as your ability to work remotely.
Absolutely. And I think right now, it's almost like identify what your remote superpower would be. So we all have certain expertise when it comes to being remote. So really identify what yours is at this given moment in time, whether you're a master expert at Zoom or Skype or other sort of channels, and really be able to speak to that, because they're going to ask, like, what experience have you had being remote, working remote, and how did you feel about it? So have a little superpower and jot that down, because it will be important when they'll ask you the questions.
And here's something else to think about, because a lot of people think my skills have to be Excel, or it has to be a particular platform, or it has to be knowing a particular mathematical formula. But honestly, these are other things that employers want now, and I want to read them out to you because I want to stress them. Handling technical malfunctions and thinking on the spot. Those are things that show your ability to adapt to new things. If you get too flustered, if you don't know how to ask a question, that's going to be difficult. But you've had to handle some of those technical malfunctions, I'm sure, even in your experiences right now. Dressing professionally outside of an office. Because when you have to go to an interview in person, or you are in a classroom, you might or you go to your job and it is actually at a company, you're dressing a certain way. But when you're at home, you need to dress as professionally, but when you're not in that physical office. Maintaining a schedule and meeting deadlines despite distractions is really, really key. And if in fact there is a distraction, you might need to have to identify it. For example, my dog was just in the room, and if I could say in a remote way, oh, my dog is just passing through, I need to wait until the noise or the distraction is through before I continue. That's actually a skill. And being able to maximize your day, you will still have the same amount of work to do, but you're going to be in your home where you have a lot more time to do it maybe, and you want to know, employers want to know that you can structure that day and you'll still be efficient. And also speaking to people in groups and adapting to social cues is very different when you're on a little screen versus when you can see someone and when you can interact with more body language. So these are things I really do want you to think about.
And the one thing I will add to that is I do have some remote tips and tricks, which I feel is appropriate to share. So handling a technical malfunction, just making sure whoever you're communicating with remotely, you have their phone number, you have their email address. So that way, if something were to happen, you have a way to get in touch with them very quickly. So I always feel like that's a good tip. Also, if you're not dressing for your remote office, making sure that you have an outfit on standby that you can get into in a moment's notice. So I also feel like that's good, just to have ready to go. Like, this is my remote, gonna jump into outfit. And really maximizing your day. So if you know, for instance, you had mentioned a dog, if you know you have to walk your dog 3-4 times a day, plan that into your schedule for the day. So you know if you have meetings throughout the day, you know when you can do it and not really be affected, or people aren't trying to look and find for you. And the other thing, adapting to social cues, which I think is important, is just knowing when to listen. You don't always have to listen to respond. So just really looking at the audience and realizing when you need to participate and when you feel like you have to participate. is also a good skill to have.
And then again, these are just a few things that I keep bringing up, all of these things, thinking out of the box and finding opportunities, being positive. Employers want positivity in spite of the fact that things are crazy or you're feeling a little bit uncertain. Everybody wants someone who's positive, and always being willing to pitch in and contribute no matter what the capacity. In times like this, we probably have to do different things than we might have had to do in our job description. So being able to, in this interview, put forth the fact that you are someone who's willing to think out of the box, who's willing to pitch in wherever. And so jotting down in your experiences, whether they be at school, in jobs, when have you had to actually do some of these things? Because during an interview, these might be things that you're going to be drawn upon when they ask you a question that is a little bit different than maybe what they might have been asking before.
100%. And I would say in 98% of interviews that I've performed over the last 20 years, they all want to hear teamwork. They all want to know how you're an integral part of a team, how you feel about teamwork. Are you willing to help others if your work is slow? That is a huge component of every culture that I've ever interviewed with, because it's important to show that you're a team player, because they want to know they'll be able to count on you. So I feel like that's really important.
So I touched upon before, where are you going to come up with these skills and attributes and values and these out of the box things? Where do you find those? Well, you have been a remote learner. Some of you have had internships, part-time jobs. There's academic projects, group projects, which would definitely bring that team work and working as a group together. You might have had some volunteer roles or even leadership or participation in clubs and sports. I think too many people think that the only experience they can draw upon for their resume or their interview are paid experiences. And that is not true. It is from all of these types of experiences.
100%. And I feel as though if people feel like they don't have the right experience or what they think the right experiences is, they downplay all these things. And these things are all really important. I've known people who've gotten a job because they mentioned that they were an Eagle Scout. And that really it's such an amazing thing to go through to be an Eagle Scout, that really spoke to leadership qualities. So as we were talking about earlier, those values, the things that you say will naturally come out about who you really are. And some of these things are awesome. Volunteer roles, I mean, team sports, you might say, oh, I played softball for 15 years, who's going to care? People care because it shows that you're passionate about something, you're dedicated, you worked hard, you have a great work ethic, you stuck with it. So don't downplay any of those things. They're all really important and can help you land the role that you're looking for.
And one of the things I'm just going to add to that, a lot of students will say, I just did this, or I just did that. And that is a word that I want taken out of everyone's brain and vocabulary, because that downplays what you've done. If I just played a sport, that is less effective than I played sports for 15 years. So it is assessing, I said skills, but really it's assessing all of these things. We take for granted who we are and how we work and what we do. So as you're jotting down some of these strengths, start thinking about the examples of where you have applied these skills. And then further with that, have stories to develop on these examples, because that's what the employer is going to want to talk about during the interview.
100%. And a lot of interviews are very different. They're going to ask you questions you might not have thought about. But they're going to ask you a lot of similar questions in every single interview that you go into. So having this list of your top skills, your top values, with great examples and stories to go along with it, when they ask you the easy questions, you're going to have a fabulous answer because it will be well thought out and it will really speak to who you are and what you can do for the company.
So, um, before you even have the interview, it is very important that you research and know the employer. So some of the previous slides have been talking about knowing yourself, but now you need to know the company. And this is that question, why do you want to work for us? What interests you about this position? And so some things that you want to know are on this list. And there are different ways to find out about the company, but it's very important to know who they are because you want to match who you are to them, because that's the person they want to work with, the person that matches their ideals, their skill set, and their culture. And Angela, I know you had a lot to say about that.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, it is so important if you're going to interview with a company that you know what they stand for and you know who they are. They're always going to give you a quick 10-minute synopsis of this is our company, this is what we do. So you're always going to get that from them. But what I find really impressive when I'm interviewing someone is if they already know things. So as I'm explaining, they can say, "Oh yes, I read your mission statement," and you know, I really align with that because it shows, oh, well, they cared enough to start looking up who we were. So it almost creates that you're part of the team before the interview even ends. And I think that that's really valuable information. A great way to find out about the companies is to look on Glassdoor. They give CEO ratings, they give actual employee comments. Sometimes they give salaries and jobs that they have open. So you can kind of see from a whole company perspective, do they really practice what they preach? Do employees leave there because, you know, they find other jobs? They leave there because of management. And you'll see these things and it will really start creating a full picture. And I think that that's important to know before you go in. I had someone I was interviewing with, the CEO had a 98% rating on Glassdoor, which is almost unheard of. And they, you know, brought that up in the interview. Now, I was really impressed that your CEO has a 98% approval rating. And they were blown away that the person knew it. I mean, it was almost like the interview should have just ended there because they got the job. But when you do your homework, it really shines through. You can start talking the talk like you already belong in the culture.
And another thing you can do, we at Career Services, we have an application called the Vault, which is where you can look into companies and you can see what other people have said about that company, as well as doing your own networking through LinkedIn, looking at other alums. And if you talk to people about a company, you will then know more than the average person walking into that interview. So networking is another way to find some of those things. So in my opinion, I think the best interview, I think I have to go like this, yes. The best interview is a conversation. So we all think about that an employer is going to ask you a question and then you as the interviewee are going to answer. And that is true and you need to be prepared for that. But if you can find an interview where it's actually a conversation, a back and forth, and part of that comes from you doing some of your research, that's going to be an even better interview. And again, I like when you said, Angela, that it's part of the team. You're already part of that camaraderie and that part of togetherness when you can have a conversation.
Absolutely. And a conversation goes both ways. I mean, you might leave the interview and say, this isn't for me, and that's okay. Or you might leave the interview and say, this is the best place I ever, you know, this is my ideal opportunity. And that's good too. But just to know that if you know, conversation flows both ways. You might not feel like it's the right place for you, and that's okay. And that shouldn't be, it can be very challenging to kind of navigate through that feeling. But if you have a feeling, I always say, trust your gut, something's there. So just remember, they're very much interviewing with you as you are with them. It's a two-way street to find a good fit.
So what to bring to the interview? And I have a bring in quotations because now here in the Northeast, at least, you might not be going to that interview. You might be having that interview right in your living room. But there are some things that you really should have with you when you're going to that interview. Resume, a pen and paper to jot things down. That's very important. And you can do it to the side. They might not even know that you're actually writing things down, but that will help you with that conversation and for things that are going to come later on that we'll discuss, like a thank you note or questions for the interviewer. A glass of water. That doesn't mean to eat while you're there, but I just drank a glass of tea. There's nothing wrong with that, but always bring your best self. And that is from head to toe. It's how you dress. It's your attitude. Always bring your best self to this new type of interview.
And I truly love that statement, your best self. Just know whatever you do 15 minutes before the interview to the time when you walk in the door is all going to attribute to the kind of state you're in when you are about to interview. So if you're driving to an interview, I wouldn't, don't have conversations on your cell phone like you normally would, because you never know. You could have a conversation that didn't leave you feeling good, and then you're just going to keep thinking about that the whole time you're interviewing. So really preparing yourself that 10 to 15 minutes before you go in, putting yourself in the best state. Some people jump on trampolines, some people crank up the music and really play their favorite song or dance around all silly. It's whatever you can do to get yourself into that positive state where you're so passionate and you're so ready to go that you're just gonna nail that interview. And it's so important. Don't put yourself behind the 8 ball with putting yourself in a conversation where you pick up a phone and have an uncomfortable conversation, or have to pick up a gallon of milk after you leave the interview. Really focus on the questions that you have, the answers you're about to give, and getting yourself into that positive frame of mind. It's so important. And you'll notice if you jump around for 30 seconds, it's like you're in a completely different frame of mind than if you were just sitting down. So finding what works for you and really utilizing that to bring your best self forward.
So whether it's a phone or a video interview, you should always be upbeat and energetic, having your items in front of you, standing or smiling, choosing a quiet room so that your surroundings are what they should be, and always dressing for success. And this is, again, this is not when it's an in-person interview. This is really when you are going to be in your own surroundings. You should always practice the technology before you start the interview, and make sure that you're looking into the camera. I'm fearing that I am not, because I like looking at faces. So I have a feeling that my eyes look like they are closed. And tell other people around you that you are going to be doing something very important, to leave you alone, to take care of other things, not to put on the TV. Those are ways to prepare for these kinds of interviews.
100%. And I feel like there's a good tip that I have about a video interview. And if you have your questions written out about the popular questions you'll be asked during an interview, and you have your answers, you have your skills, you have your values, making sure you put them on a piece of paper, you can tape them behind your computer. So that way, if you get stumped, you could just happen to glance up and you will see like, oh, okay, I wanted to mention my communication. And it will trigger and make you more comfortable and confident during the conversation. So it won't be able to be seen in the camera, but you can see it. And I think that that's important. Also, if it's a phone interview, it is not cheating. It's not a test. You can have things around you that really remind you of why you're applying for this job. Again, the answers that you have to some of the popular questions. It's putting your best self forward. So really working on those. And then I will speak to this. If you cannot find a quiet place in your home, even if you have a dog that just will randomly bark for no reason, make sure, take it from your car, take it from somewhere else. So you know that you can really be in a distraction-free environment. It's so important for someone to give you 15 to 30 minutes of their time to interview you. And it's not that it would distract you, it could distract them. And then the conversation will be thrown off, and some of the magic that could be happening from the answers you're giving could be lost. And it would be very unfortunate. So if you cannot find a quiet place, find a quiet place. Because it really will make a difference in how you act and in your confidence level and how the conversation will flow.
So again, these are things that are sort of like at every interview. You want to sit up straight and have eye contact. You want to arrive, as I said in quotes, a few minutes early, but not too early. Because if you're too early, you'll be nervous and they're not ready for you yet. You want to, but you also definitely don't want to be late. Try not to use ums and likes and you knows. That's in every interview that you go to. No cell phone or electronics, even while you're waiting. And part of that is noise, but also it has to do with you don't want to hear something that's going to distract you mentally or emotionally from putting your best self forward during this interview. And another thing that's it's so hard to try and be confident even when you're nervous, but a smile is just a wonderful thing. It relaxes you, it relaxes the interviewer, and it just sort of is that kind of moment. So try to smile. And we have a little bit of a handshake question mark, and I'm going to leave that to Angela.
Great. So I'm going to go from the bottom up. I'll start with the handshake. So handshake was so common, especially for an in-face interview. Walk in, you shake the hand firmly, you sit down, you have a great greeting. Well, in this kind of virtual environment, sometimes you can't do a handshake. So, sometimes it's a simple, waving, saying hello, greeting somebody if it's a video. Or also, if you are going to an in-person interview in this kind of time, just asking the question, hey, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Are you guys wearing masks? Are you doing gloves? Is there anything you want me to bring so that, we can both be comfortable for both parties? I'd love to, when you walk in, you say, I'd love to shake your hand, but just want to make sure you're okay with it. And that way you're putting it out there and putting them at ease. Because they might say like, oh no, come on in. We're not handshaking, and kind of make light of it as a joke. Or sometimes I know people are doing little like virtual fist bumps. So just kind of like navigating that water, putting yourself out there first so that you're taking the initiative. And that's what an employer wants to see, that you're taking the initiative to see exactly how you would like them to fall in line. Some of the other things I think is amazing. Cell phones can be such a you're waiting. And it also just shows a level of attentiveness. You could be, if it was in person, you could be looking around their office, trying to identify some of the things that they have there to see if they, are from the company themselves. And I would say the professional speak is always important. Likes and ums. If you're a like and ummer, you're going to be a like and ummer. So that's okay. Just try to, scale it back a little. And that doesn't truly bother a lot of interviewers. What I think really bothers interviewers is slang more than anything else. One, because sometimes we don't know what it means. So it kind of puts us on notice that we're not with the current trends. And I think it also can make the conversation be a little too casual. So just be careful that you're not using any slang terminology. I'd focus a little bit more on that than the likes and the ums, because if you're nervous and do that anyway, you wouldn't want to then compound it with the slang speak. And as it comes to punctuality, I probably would say about 60% of my colleagues will not hire someone if they show up late for an interview, because it just shows a certain level of commitment and initiative and a reliability. So make sure you're punctual for sure, because you wouldn't want to have the best interview of your entire career and not get hired because you were 5 minutes late. So making sure you navigate where the company is, giving yourself some more time. I love 15 minutes. I think it gives the employer enough time to get ready, but not too much time that they have to cancel meetings because then they feel like you're there a little too early. So definitely adhere to that. Being your best professional self. And I will say I've worked with a lot of casual companies. I've worked with a lot of digital marketers, and a lot of them just wear whatever to work. But they get really impressed when someone comes in to interview in a suit. And I think that that's just one of the common themes. If you're interviewing, put on a suit, because it will always set you apart from everyone else. People like seeing that. It shows that you care. And again, one of the companies I worked with, it was in Florida, so it was like tank tops and shorts, and someone came in a suit, they were impressed. Totally was exactly what they were looking for. So even if you don't think that's part of the culture, it is what people would like to see during an interview. And then posture and eye contact. Eye contact is so important. And you don't have to stare at the employer or stare at the screen, however it is that you're having the conversation, but just make sure that you're checking in with your eyes every now and then and smiling. And it's all super important to having a great interview.
So there's a lot to talk about here and not so much time, but I just wanted to bring up the elevator pitch and then a few sort of common questions that really will be asked in so many different ways at every interview. Tell me about yourself. What is your story? And you really need to work on developing this. This is your brand, and it's quick. It is where you are now, something about you that pops out, and what are your goals, like short-term and long-term. And we can't get into it completely now, but I would like you to talk a little bit about that, Angela. But definitely you have to have that short, quick, personal advertisement that lets the interviewer know that they want to speak to you a little bit more, that you want to grab their interest. And it's something you have to practice.
100%. I don't actually have too much to add except put that on that piece of paper or you're jotting stuff down. And you'll be surprised if someone asks someone on the street what their special talent is, they might struggle. But again, if you have it written down and identified and you have your pitch, then these answers will come very naturally, and that will make you showcase during an interview.
So now we're at sort of what types of interview questions are there. We cannot get everything that's going to be asked. That's impossible. I don't know what that was. That is not even possible. But there are going to be certain types of questions that they will ask you. And I think something to anticipate is that you will not know every answer that they want. You will not be able to anticipate every question that they're going to give you. There's going to be questions that sound similar, and you're going to think, what can I say that's different? There's going to be things that you said, wow, I never thought they would have asked that question. So just remember, there are types of questions to prepare for. And one is that walking me through your resume. And again, you want to highlight certain areas, pique their interest. You want to refer back to areas later. This is not the time to go line by line, but I know, Angela, you wanted to say something great about the walk me through your resume question.
Absolutely. And I will say in 75 to 85% of the interviews you go on, they're going to say, I see a resume here, but why don't you just tell me what's on it? So making sure that you're versed frontwards, backwards, your skills, the places you've been, the things that you've highlighted in your resume, make sure that are really coming through so you can walk them through it with no issue.
Well, what I really liked, though, was when you said, now tell me something that's not on the resume.
Oh, yes. So I was recently asked, so tell me something that I wouldn't know about you, which can be I've never got that question before. I think it's phenomenal. But it took me a minute to actually think of a good answer. So also when you're thinking about walking someone through your resume, thinking about what they wouldn't know about you that they might like to know about you. And I think that could be really valuable.
I love that when you said that. I hadn't thought about that. I love that. So again, this getting to know you type of questions, there is no right or wrong answer. These are just, again, I've put some of them here. They are going to be different for everyone. The answer is less important than the delivery of that answer because they really want to get to know you. I know there was one that seemed quite interesting about what courses prepared you for this job, because some people don't have the experience for a particular job, but maybe they've taken some courses. So I think, Angela, you wanted to say something about that.
Absolutely. I think it's important for when you go into a job, depending on what type of line of work it is. I don't really think it matters too much, but really identify with what the job description says. and looking back through your career, especially if you're a recent grad, and what classes have you done that really speaks about something that it's in that job description? Or maybe it was a class that you took that really was new, cutting edge technology that you see in that job description that you really want to showcase when you get in there. So knowing what classes that you've taken prepared you for this job, even though you might not have the traditional experience, you'll have some educational experience.
And again, I just did want to stress that they might ask you now, how do you feel about remote work? I don't think that was a question that was so apparent just a few months ago, actually. We talked about doing the research about the organization, because what do you know about this organization? It isn't just the industry in general, but what about this company? What appeals to you about this company? Do you know who we service? Why do you want to work for us? So this relates back to all that research that you did about the company.
100%. And it will also speak to how much education you have, because if they're saying, oh, we're just launching this new program, and you're like, oh, I saw that. Oh, it's really interesting. Or, do you know, is it still expected for this summer? I mean, then it's, again, you're already part of the team. You're already including yourselves in conversations that surround yourself with the company.
And again, we have the overall fit. Why should we hire you specifically? What can you contribute to this position? Tell me something that's not on your resume. And this again is the interviewer is trying to figure out, do they want you to work with the people at this position? And so knowing yourself and knowing how you fit is really that way of doing it. And they probably will ask you your strengths and weaknesses, but even just having jotted some of these superpowers and some weaknesses down, you are going to be prepared to answer that question.
100%. And everyone's afraid of the weakness question. And it gets asked a lot because employers want to know, well, tell me what you think your biggest weakness is. And it's just being able to really speak to something that's not going to be a red flag for an employer. And I feel like that's kind of a challenging question to answer. But, you know, I've had people tell me that they don't like working in groups. They'd rather work by themselves. They don't like being distracted. Those can all come off as red flags, especially if it's a teamwork and culture kind of environment. I've had someone say, I have never been on time in my entire life, and I don't think it's ever going to start now. And I mean, and for some employers, that could be a big red flag. Like, they want people who are committed to coming in on time. So just making sure that the weakness that you pick, again, if you're writing down a bunch of notes for future interviews, just making sure that you pick something that's not going to be a red flag for the employer.
So in a very short period of time, unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about behavioral questions, because the best predictor of future behavior is often past behavior. So this can be on so many different types of experiences or themes, but tell me about a time when, describe a situation where, give me an example of, and they can ask it on anything. And once again, this is why you, having prepared yourself, going through your resume line by line, knowing the skills that they're looking for, and having that story, you can talk about a time when you've had a conflict with a co-student or a co-team member, and how you resolved it and what the result was. So these are possible topics, but just know they are going to probably ask you, give me a precise example of something, because that's going to show how you probably will do that same thing with this new company.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think the way to answer that very quickly, we call it STAR. Sometimes it's CAR, meaning situation, task, action, result, or CAR is often the challenge, action, and result. The situation, you know, a time when I had a conflict with a coworker was, and you're describing the task a little bit. how did you resolve that conflict? Did you go to your supervisor? Did you suggest that you would have 3 or 4, meetings before you had to actually meet a deadline? What were your concrete actions to satisfy this or resolve this conflict? And what was the result? The result could be you got praise from your director. The result could be that I had to deal with a very unhappy coworker for a very long time. The result could be you made a mistake, but I learned how to do something different in the future. So that's sort of the way of answering these, tell me about a time when.
And the one thing I will add, because I think you hit that beautifully, is if you feel like you lost your train of thought, don't be afraid to say, did I hit all the points in that question? Or do you mind repeating the question? I want to make sure I got all the different facets of it correctly. There's nothing wrong with that.
It's terrific. Your skills, once again, if you've done a lot of preparation, you can answer that question. Can you please rate your creativity? How often do you use social media? Have you used Excel often? Are you confident with Zoom? So if you have assessed all your skills beforehand, this question is going to be an awful lot easier for you to answer.
Absolutely. Preparation is the key to success.
And then finally, when to stop. You don't need to go on and on and on. At some point, it's okay. You don't want to be too abrupt, but at some point, if you feel that you have answered the question, stop, take a breath. If you're lucky enough to be in a conversation type interview, the interviewer might ask a follow-up. And if not, it's okay to have a little bit of silent moment for everyone to reflect.
Yes, you don't have to fill the space. It is okay to stop talking and wait for the next person to ask you a question. You don't want to go into the situation where you just keep rambling. So if you feel as though you've talked a lot, you probably have, kind of cut it short.
And then this is very important, that you need to have, going into that interview, 3 or 4 questions that you are going to ask the interviewer. It would be wonderful after that research that you've done, after speaking to a colleague, that you can mention something that's going on with the company. It's difficult, but if you're able to jot down something that the interviewer says during the interview, it would be wonderful if you could come up with a follow-up question. So if someone said, we do a lot of community outreach here, and at some point you could remember and you could say, tell me a little bit more about this community outreach program. And this is not the time to talk about benefits or salary or anything like that. You need to wait on that until you have the offer.
100%. That time for you to ask questions is to know more about the position, about the interviewers, and about the company. Not so much about what they're offering to you.
And then I think this is maybe the final slide. A thank you note is a must. You can do it by email. It could be handwritten, but you need to write a letter to every person that you interviewed with in the process. Make them as personal as you can. If as Angela said, you're able to jot down what different people have said to you, you can mention in that email something that person said. It was so nice to hear about, or I enjoyed learning how you do XYZ for the company. So I think it definitely makes a difference, to have that thank you note sent.
100%. It really puts a personalized touch. I don't think it really particularly matters if it's handwritten or an email. If you don't have an email address, it's always, you have a fallback plan of sending a handwritten note. But I did just have a little poll throughout my HR colleagues, which I think is important. But if you interview with more than one person, should you put them all in the same email? And it was unanimously no. Everyone deserves their own personal thank you. And some even said they get pretty offended if somebody else is mentioned, in the subject line with their thank you. So knowing that that's a rub for people, which I got unanimously across a good amount of people in my little study. So making sure everyone gets a personalized, just like Sarah had mentioned, something that they mentioned to you that really stood out. Thank you for telling me about your experience with. It meant a lot to me, and really getting that personalized touch. So I would say individualized is key for my little research.
So that is our end of the presentation. Does anybody have any questions? We have, Angela is so wonderful, and with her experience, if you have any questions specifically for her, this would be a great time to ask them. Oh, you have to unmute.
Good question. So I was wondering, and thank you, by the way, the presentation was great. I loved it. I had a bunch of tips written down, pages full. I was wondering, is it okay? So I was thinking of the question with, are you okay with remote learning, or would you prefer it? And is it okay if we answer by saying, I love seeing people in person, but I'm capable of working remotely?
Great answer.
Okay.
Yep, everyone's allowed to have a preference. So you can say, I'm a real people person, so I really think for me, it's better to be with people, but understanding how things are, I can definitely excel doing it remotely too. And I've come up with some great ideas to make sure that even though it's remote, I still get that personal connection that I would if it was face-to-face.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say this was like one of the best presentations I've ever been to. I was listening and watching, but of course I was multitasking at the same time. But I think it was, you know, the best one ever. Was as Sarah always says. But Angela, thank you so much. As busy as you are right now, transitioning and moving, you know, across the state of Florida. You're just amazing, and I just want to personally thank you for, you know, helping our students and for reaching out and saying you mentor any students and things like that. And could any of the students on here, I know you'll be busy for the next few weeks, but could they reach out to you through LinkedIn?
Absolutely, 100%. I think that's part of excelling in your career is being able to reach back and lift someone back up. So I love doing it. So as many people as want to reach out to me, I'm happy to help.
Well, thank you all, and I'm cognizant of your time and everybody else's time. Sarah, hit a home run again. We're going to have this on video, so thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you so very much.